So now we have a copy of Dwarf Underground on our own machines. We can open it up in code and have a look. We see static HTML, static CSS. We know what those are. The rest of this stuff is part of React, really. And here's an important file, package.json. So we're using a package manager now to manage dependencies. In other words, third-party scripts that we didn't write ourselves that we're using inside our app. We're not manually downloading them and trying to keep their versions up to date and keeping track of where they are. We're using a package manager to do it for us. And the de facto standard package manager for JavaScript is called NPM, Node Package Manager. There's an alternative called Yarn, which I highly recommend to the point of insisting that you use for this class because it is way faster and this Wi-Fi network is slow enough as it is. It uses the same packages. It uses the same remote repository. It's just a much faster client for it. So we'll use Yarn, which you should have installed as part of your setup stuff before class began. And what both of them do is look at a list of dependencies, download them, and place them in your project. So here's a list of dependencies. React and React DOM, and dev dependencies, React scripts. And then there's a list of scripts. There's some metadata about the project itself. So we need React, React DOM, and React scripts to be in this project. If you look through all these directories, though, you will not find them. They're not there yet, because this repository only contains the package.json file that you need to load the dependencies. You have to install them yourself because they just don't need to waste the space in the repository when everyone who has NPM or Yarn can do it. So we need to run that from our directory. So if you were using NPM, the command would be npm install. But we're using Yarn, so the command is yarn install. And you'll see some stuff happen, and it may take a minute. But at some point during that process, you'll notice the folder node modules magically appears in your project. So the way both Yarn and NPM work is they take all your dependencies, they download them, and then they put them inside this node modules directory. And that directory doesn't get committed because it's listed in the gitignore file here. But if we open that up, we'll see there's a ton of stuff in there. A lot more than just 3 dependencies. Because the way package management works is it will install your dependencies as well. So React scripts, while it's only listed once here, is dependent on a whole bunch of other things. But we don't even need to know what they are. All we need to know is React scripts. And the rest of the dependencies will automatically get installed as soon as we install it. And the same goes for the other things. So you can install things like jQuery this way too, but for heaven's sake, do not mix jQuery and React unless you have a super good reason, and spoiler alert, you don't. We're not doing DOM manipulation anymore. We're going to do everything the React way. Anybody used any other package management system? Like any Linux users? apt-get? You use apt-get? Or do you use it? The Fedora one, which is a RPM?
Wasn't it Yum and then...
Oh, Yum. That's right. Yeah, Yum. Yeah. Yeah. So, same idea. The App Store is basically a package management system. So that all comes from our package.json file. So then we have a public directory, which has our index.html, which you'll see has a bunch of other stuff in the head, and then the body, it really only has one element, right? A div with an ID of root. And this thing is pretty thoroughly commented, so if you're curious why any of the rest of this stuff is here, you can look there. And then there's a source directory, and that's where our React code actually lives. And you'll see so far there is an app component, a test file for that, a style sheet. There's an index style sheet, and there's an index.js. And there's an SVG file. So where is all this stuff? Because this is JSX, we can't just open this in a browser. If you open up index.html, you're going to be disappointed. Because the magic isn't going to happen because JSX is not JavaScript. So we need to turn it into JavaScript. But we don't have to worry about how that's done because it's already configured for us. All we have to do is start a development server on our machine. So we are going to have to actually serve this from a web browser. We can't just open raw HTML files in our browser. A web server is what I meant to say. So if we were using NPM, we would just run npm start. We're using yarn, so predictably enough, we type yarn start. And what it will do is run a web server, automatically start compiling our JSX into real JavaScript, and open it up in a new tab in your browser by default. Now your terminal window will be monopolized by this. To kill the server, hit Control-C, not Command-C on a Mac, Control-C no matter which platform you're on. And if you want to keep working, you can open up a new tab or a new window or whatever so that you can keep typing shell commands while your server's running. So this is what our React app is actually doing. And hopefully, as part of the setup process, you installed the React DevTools Chrome extension. If so, then you'll have a tab for that in your DevTools. So we'll probably off the page to the right here, so you can click this little arrow and go to React. And here are the React DevTools. And you'll see your components. And you can see their state and their props, if any, which right now, there's not much to see. But that's something we'll be using quite a bit once we start writing our own code. So index.html, we saw, has that one root element that's going to get replaced. In index.js, in the source folder, we'll see the thing that we know we have to have. We have to have React, we have to have React DOM, we have to have a component, which it looks like it's importing. Then we have to call React DOM render, give it a line of JSX, tell it which element to replace, and that's it. But in this case, our component is coming from another file, app.js. So here's app.js. So worth pointing out at this point as well, naming conventions. In React, you name your files exactly what you name your components, capital letters and all. It is not actually required that you put capital letters, but everyone does it. So as horrible as capital letters and file names are, this is one case when you should probably do it because it's a signal to anyone reading your code that this thing contains a component or at least a class. So you'll see index.js, index.css. Those are lowercased, but all the ones that are related to the app component are uppercased, capitalized, because they're a component. Yeah. Yes, it's conventional. There are exceptions when it might be fine, but as a general rule, one component per file, yeah. So this is what's rendering that thing on the page. So class app extends component. In our CodePen example, we had react.component. Here, they actually imported component separately. That's why they can just say extends component. We'll talk more about that in a minute. We see that it returns some JSX. There's a single div wrapping everything else, so that's legal. We see instead of class, we have class name. Why? Because class is a reserved word in JavaScript, right? And this is really JavaScript, disguised as an HTML-like language. But it's really JavaScript. So yeah, you can't just say class. So we have class name, and that is camel-cased because prop names are always camel-cased in React. We have an image, H2, etc. So that's all this. But we don't need all that. So for the moment, I'm just going to get rid of everything except that outer div. And I'll put an H1 in there that says Dwarf Underground, just to prove that we can modify this thing and we know what we're doing. So I'll save that, and immediately my browser will update. You don't have to hit refresh. That dev server is always watching for you to make changes, the dev server that's running in the background. And as soon as you make changes, it'll recompile your JSX into real JavaScript, and it will even refresh your browser tab for you. Now, it looks like on my terminal here, I actually have a little warning. Line 2 of app.js, logo is defined but never used, no unused vars. So it's actually configured to look for stuff like that. If you declare a variable and never use it, it's going to complain at you. So line 2 here, logo, that was the logo that they were using on their version. So we don't need that anymore, so I'm going to backspace over it. Just get rid of that line altogether. And in fact, we don't even need that file logo.svg. So I'll delete that too from the list of files on the left. I'll save my changes, make sure I didn't blow anything up. Looks like it, so that was safe to do. So app.css also has a whole bunch of CSS related to their sort of boilerplate example there. So I'm just going to delete all that as well. I'm going to leave the file, but I'm going to delete the contents because we don't need any of that CSS anymore. Again, make sure I didn't blow anything up. I didn't. Now I'm left aligned instead of centered. That's fine. One other thing, if you look back at index.html, you'll see a title of React app. That's no fun. Let's title it Dwarf Underground. Look back in the browser and your tab title should have changed. So now we have a little starting point. We got rid of their sort of boilerplate stuff. So I'm going to commit that. Remove boilerplate from app component. Then we want to start making it our own. So this was created with something called Create React App, which is a project from Facebook who created React. So they're not 100% evil, just like 99 point lots of nines. But they did give us React, which is pretty cool. And they gave us a project called Create React App, which makes it super easy to generate a React app that is pre-configured to do stuff like turn JSX into real JavaScript. So this is basically the default Create React App project with those static HTML and CSS files added for us to copy from. So that's what we're looking at here. That's where this package.json came from and everything.